From Ukraine funding to labor regulation, 2024 gave us drama, debates, and a whopping 95% failure rate for legislation tracked by IssueVoter. Welcome back to Beyond the Bill Number. Today, we're diving into 131 pieces of legislation analyzed by IssueVoter in 2024. These weren't just any bills, they were some of the most significant and debated policies shaping our country. Stephen, are you ready to unpack the highlights, the misses, and the surprises?
Absolutely, Sarah. If last year's legislative landscape taught us anything, it's that getting a bill from proposal to law is a little bit like trying to get a cat to fetch. It's rare, it's unpredictable, but if it happens, it certainly leaves you with a story to tell. As a reminder, let's just talk about IssueVoter. So IssueVoter is a non-partisan, non-profit organization that aims to give everybody a voice in US democracy. And one of the things they do, as part of amongst all the work that they do, is to analyze key federal bills and then present both sides of the debate to help people form informed views on them, and then give them the opportunity, obviously, to join that debate as well.
And they do a great job. And Bill Track 50 is very proud to partner with them and kind of bring a more balanced view to some of the things that are the most common things that we're talking about as a society. And so with this, before we kind of kick off looking at everything that they do with, the links to their analysis that we put in our bill pages, but also the blogs that we publish every month that dives into our IssueVoter bill of the month, let's discuss what we think they might be looking at in 2025 with a Republican-controlled Congress and White House. And what are these kind of big bills that we think will be looked at this year?
Yeah, I think it'll be, some of them are fairly predictable because obviously the incoming Trump administration has already signaled what their main priorities will be, and then Congress will have to pass those bills. So there'll be a big reconciliation, at least one, maybe two early on, and that will focus on immigration, with obviously the Trump presidency seeking to sort of complete the promises they made during the election campaign. So it'll be really interesting to see what the detail is, and I guarantee that IssueVoter will be sort of analysing that one and looking at the detail and looking at the views. So you've got that. Then another one will be to do with tariffs. So of course the president can impose certain tariffs, but not all of them. So there will have to be some congressional legislation as well to back that up, and that could face quite a rocky road. It'll be interesting to see how the Republican majority, particularly in the House, will actually draft that bill to try and attract enough attention, try and attract support from the Democrats as well, so they can actually pass it.
Yes, and I think that we'll also see a lot of other stuff that is more not necessarily directly tied to Trump and the Republican Congress, but more with our time. So as we know, California has had these awful wildfires. We had these awful hurricanes earlier in 2024. So there is a real need to address some federal funding and support as these natural disasters keep getting worse and worse. And I do think this year we'll also see a lot more AI legislation like we did last year. We're still kind of uncovering what's going on and how we are going to be legislating this. So I think those are two other kind of interesting things that I think they'll kind of be looking at as well.
Absolutely. And I understand that a sort of a member of the House has already promised to put forward a bill to rename the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of America. So we'll have to see whether that one gets covered. And whether
I'd love to see the both sides analysis of that one.
On the one hand, on the other hand, it's crazy. Yeah. Yes, let's see.
Okay. Well, let's start with the big picture. Of the 131 bills that IssueVoter tracked last year, just 6 made it across the finish line. What does that say about Congress right now?
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? Just 6 bills out of the 131 that they covered. It sort of really says that even in a carefully selected pool of high impact legislation, which of course this is, they chose the bills that were the most important, really. The odds of passing are very slim. So with only 6 enacted bills, a clear sign that gridlock and polarization continue to dominate the legislative process in Congress. But also a reminder of just how significant those few successes were.
Well, and speaking of successes, let's talk about the Relieve Act. This bill, which provided $27.9 billion in funding for Ukraine and $4.4 billion in Israel's defense systems has sparked a really heated debate. What made this bill so polarizing?
Well, we spoke about this a little last week in our broader discussion of the 118th Congress. The Relief Act hit a nerve on two fronts, really. Foreign aid versus domestic priorities. So supporters framed it as an investment in democracy and security. So think of it like Senator Warner's arguments that funding Ukraine also protects American interests. Whereas on the other hand, you've got critics like Republican Matt Gaetz, who saw it as a misallocation of resources, especially with domestic challenges like inflation and infrastructure, which are getting less attention, or as he sees, it's getting less attention as a result of this focus on Ukraine.
Yeah, it's interesting because the public engagement on this bill was off the charts. It even made Bill Track 50's top 10 most read bills of 2024. And do you think that reflects the growing public scrutiny on foreign aid, or?
Definitely. When billions of taxpayer dollars are involved, people want to understand where it's going and why. And obviously Ukraine is a huge story. It has been for years and will continue to be so. And it was a big issue during the election campaign, which is a little bit surprising, actually, given foreign affairs tend not to feature too heavily, but it really did this time round. So the Relief Act really tapped into this broader question about America's role in the world, whether domestic or international priorities should take precedence, and in particular, how that limited pot of money is spent.
Yeah, and I mean, another notable win from 2024 was the Reforming Intelligence and Securing America Act. And this one brought big changes to surveillance practices. So, Stephen, how did this bill manage to pass in such a divided Congress?
Well, it was a bit of a success story, really, for how Congress should work. And it passed simply through careful compromise.
Oh.
So privacy advocates got their stricter restrictions on FBI queries, which they wanted, while law enforcement secured emergency exceptions to keep critical investigations moving. So it wasn't perfect for either side, but it was enough to get both on board. And it's a really rare feat in today's political climate.
Yeah, and I mean, as a reminder, even that contentious issues can lead to progress when both sides find some common ground. And let's pivot to the flip side, bills that didn't make it. So several joint resolutions aimed at overturning the Biden administration policies faced presidential vetoes. So what stood out to you here?
So each veto highlighted a fundamental clash over regulatory policy. So take the joint resolution challenging the National Labor Relations Board's joint employer standard. Doesn't strike you as being particularly controversial, but it actually engendered sort of a huge debate, really. Business groups see the standard as a threat to franchises, so they were obviously sort of supporting the joint resolution, while Labour advocates are fans of the employer standard and say it holds corporations accountable. So the president backed Labour by vetoing the resolution, despite obviously the fact that the joint resolution was backed by the Democratic sort of Senate at the time. But these vetoes really underscored the deep divides over how much oversight is too much oversight.
And then there were bills that captured the public attention but really didn't move forward, like the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act or the Disgraced Former Protectees Act. And Stephen, why do you think these types of legislation drew so much interest on Bill Track 50?
Because they do hit on hot button cultural and social issues. I mean, just as a recap, where we have discussed both of these bills before. The Anti-Semitism Awareness Act was proposing a new and quite controversial definition of anti-Semitism. The Disgraced Former Protectees Act was, of course, saying you should strip Secret Service protection from any former protectee, such as the president, who's been convicted of a felony. So people were naturally drawn to these types of legislation because they feel really personal and they spark a strong reaction. So meanwhile, of course, the less flashy but equally important bills like the technical reforms tend to fly under the radar, even if they have a bigger impact in practice. Both of these bills were good examples of what some people, though, might see as performative politics, bills that aren't the best or most sensible way to address the actual issues, and were always very unlikely to pass. But they do serve to burnish the credentials of the legislators supporting them. They can go out on the campaign trail and say, I supported this act to do X, Y, and Z. And they do generate debate as well, though, which is a good thing.
Yeah, and I mean, public engagement is such a key part of this conversation, and that's where platforms like IssueVoter Bill and Bill Track 50 come in. And And Stephen, how do we and IssueVoter Bill help bridge the gap between what happens in Congress and what people care about?
Well, we certainly try and do our bit to actually help this debate, particularly in the current climate where you've got the vast amount of information, often not reliable, just coming at you from all different directions. And so IssueVoter's analysis breaks down complex bills into sort of understandable summaries with arguments for and against, empowering people to form opinions and then take action. Bill Track 50 seeks to complement that by making it easy to track and research legislation. And together we make civic participation more accessible and impactful. Or at least that's what we try to do. Why don't you let us know whether you think we accomplished that?
Well said. And that's something that I think that we do, at least. So as we kick off 2025, we got a fresh Congress, we'll have a fresh president-ish, and, we're going to keep watching, engaging, and, hopefully celebrating some more legislative victories that are really bringing our country forward. And we've spoken about before, the Republicans are dominating everything, so I guess let's see how, even with razor-thin margins, if we can get more done and have some more of these victories. So thanks for walking us through the highs and the lows of 2024, Stephen.
Well, my pleasure, Sarah. So here's to a new year, new bills, and hopefully fewer gridlocks. We can dream.
Yes, we can. So thanks for listening to Beyond the Bill Number. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and don't forget to check out IssueVoter and Bill Track 50 for your legislative needs this year.